to say today, but very little time. So let's deal with just one thing. Of course, very unfortunately and tragically, the Italy deaths have overtaken the China deaths. In such a much smaller country with a 20th the population of China, that's quite astounding and quite dreadful. What I'm going to show you here is the pandemic. Okay, so this is China's cases in green, levelling off at about 81,000 so far, because they will get other outbreaks. Here's a Hubei province cases levelling off at 67,000 or so, 68,000, and China outside Hubei levelling off, but actually not quite, because they keep getting little clusters of cases which they are attributing to people coming into the country, but that remains to be seen, of course, at about 13,000 cases. So this plus this equals this. Okay, this is Hubei province, this is outside Hubei province. They add up to the total for China. Now this was when the total global cases, this is the rest of the world, this wedge here that I mentioned quite a long time ago when it was starting to open up. It's looking very much like the beginning of the China graph, only it looks like it's on a much larger scale. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add, so it's about 140,000 here, I'm going to add 6 points to this data and you'll see what happens to it. See, the China has gone down here. So now you can see the vast majority actually of cases are in the rest of the world, and it's still pretty much on an exponential path. So okay, here's what happened in China. Here's what's happened in the rest of the world, and that's dominated by a bunch of countries really, of course. I mean, Italy being one of them, but it's not just Italy, of course. So there you go, that's what 6 days, it makes a lot of difference to the chart, and I think that shows us that we need to stay at home as much as possible. To those working in the healthcare industry, well, I just salute you, but anybody who's not got something essential to do needs to isolate themselves, basically, as much as is humanly possible. This data is up to WHO report number 60, which was released yesterday on the 20th of March. So that's the data really that's aggregated up to the end of the 19th of March. So if you look at these live dashboards and things, the data will be a bit ahead of this, but I'm always using the WHO data because it's an end of day report and you're not looking at it at some random time in the day. All these dashboards and live things that you see, they're all a little bit different, and so I can't rely on those. I just want to use the data in the tables on the WHO situation reports. If you Google that, you can find them. There are 60 of them so far, starting on the 21st of January. But this shows the magnitude of what's going on in the rest of the world compared to the magnitude of what went on in China. And I mean, actually quite soon, I mean, China's only, what, 20% of the population of the world, roughly 1.4 billion out of 7 and a bit. It's soon going to be 4 times as many cases in the rest of the world as China. I mean, it's already probably about double, because you're up to 240,000 nearly, with 80,000 China cases. So we're already double, got 160,000 roughly, and it'll be more than that if you look at the dashboards. It's probably soon up to 200,000 cases outside China. Once we're 4 times China, you'll have as many people in the population per head with the disease as there was in China, back a month ago. So we need policies. We don't need communist policies, thank you, but we need to do voluntarily what they did to shut down their epidemic. I don't believe that they've really shut down their epidemic, personally, because they have residual cases, and the WHO has stopped quoting for individual regions in China. But if you look at the rest of China, here persistently Yeah, the daily increase, percentage increase, really plummeted from 50% down to 0.1%, but it persists at 0.1%. This is for China outside of Hubei province. Okay, that is very interesting. This is the actual number of cases. They're constantly having between about 3 and about 30 cases, new cases every day under this lockdown. So this graph should have gone really down to 0, but it hasn't gone down to 0. So they're not out of the woods yet. And the best places, like South Korea, had an increase in cases today. Singapore is beginning to break out. So this is looking like this pandemic is going to be very long lasting. It's going to be extremely persistent, and it's going to require self-isolation for a long time. I think the fact is that we need to have self-isolation of the entire planet, everybody. No inward travel. You need to move to a cellular thing where you have each nation has completely closed borders for a month, and everybody in that nation is quarantined for a month, essentially, everybody. And there are going to be exceptions to that, unfortunately, because you need healthcare workers, you need supply chain, you need the utilities, gas, water, electricity, you need the water, gas, water, electricity, and the telecommunications network, I was going to say, also. And the internet, which is a very important utility right now for everybody to get information and for dissemination of information. Of course, the phone network along with that, and television and radio. So you need all these important things, and you need people to be moving about to do that. So that's going to be very tricky. But I think everybody who's not in those essential services basically needs to stay at home as much as is humanly possible, except just to go to the shops and buy whatever food is needed. And what I meant, the other utility is, of course, the supply chain, which is extremely important, and pharmacies, which are extremely important. But the supply chain in general, especially for food, for consumer goods, forget it, and the same thing for holidays and anything else, just forget it. But those important things, yes, and that will mean there will be some risks of cross-infection from people who are working in those industries, who have to work in those industries to keep us fed and watered, to keep us alive. It's going to be a very difficult balance between all of those things, because you can see, even with very little mobility in China, you're still seeing cases popping up, and I think South Korea is going to have that right now as well, because they've come nearly to the end of their trend, but the trend is probably going to break out again at some point. Let's hope it doesn't. But there was an update today, an uptick, which is a little bit worrying for the last day or two actually. Let's select South Korea and put in the next day's data, and then I'm going to go. Okay, 68.68, so 68 days of data on this, starting January the 21st. Okay, and you see there's an uptick at the top of South Korea's curve now. That's a little bit worrying. Hopefully it's just a one-off, but that's a cluster that's just occurred, and that's not good. If I look at South Korea's trend then, which is trending down very nicely, this is the day-over-day percentage trend, has been following an exponential decay beautifully. Let's see what it says now. It started an uptrend here at the bottom. That's just what we don't want to see, actually. That's way above my trend line. If you look, my trend line has been falling all of this time. very close to zero, and they've had a little breakout. So there must be a good sized cluster of cases just occurred in South Korea. So their quarantines might not be sufficient. So I'm watching this every single day. Keeps me occupied. Don't believe what anybody tells you about this, because nobody really knows. A German doctor was saying was talking on Channel 4 about why they have less fatalities than some other countries in Europe, and he said, well, firstly, a lot of skiers came from Italy and there were a lot of cases there, and they were young fit people. The disease hasn't really got quite to the elderly yet in Germany as it has in some other countries. That's lowered the death rate, he said, but it could easily get to the elderly people. So he doesn't expect Germany's outperformance to last that long. There are more ICU, intensive care beds in Germany per person, per 1,000 people or whatever, per million people, than there are in other countries. 2 or 3 times what there are in the UK. 3 times, I think. That's a very good thing, obviously, but he doesn't think that's the major reason. And Germany was testing more aggressively, so they also tested more people with small amounts of symptoms or no symptoms. So he thinks that's why the apparent death rate is less in Germany. He doesn't really give a great deal of credence. He says there are just so many unknowns in the data right now that you just can't really predict anything. But I mean, I'm still going to attempt to make these forecasts. This is an incredibly fluid, an incredibly dangerous situation. It's going to be an economically devastating situation. We don't know how long it's going to last. I suspect it's going to last a long time, unless a vaccine is found, and unless a very quick test is found so that people can self-test on their own. That's really important. I'm still looking at the trend in Italy. The trend in Italy is here. The trend in Italy is not, well, it's a tragic trend. It's just not falling off quickly enough in percentage increase per day. And I think we've had an uptick here for WHO report number 60 for the 19th of March. So again, you've got 2 days of uptick in the trend. My forecast currently up to the previous point was for 248,000 cases for Italy. The peak number of ill people, well, the peak number of people who will be infected, if it lasts for 14 days each, will be about 70,000 people. The new cases will peak at about 5,000 per day, somewhere here, end of March, beginning of April. And if people are ill for 10 days, that's how many people will be ill at any one time, 50,000. If they're ill for 14 days, on average, it will be 70,000. And of course, this doesn't include any new cases that are not tested. Okay, this is just the new cases that are actually tested, because these are official results. Okay, so beware, Italy's got a lot of grief to come. This is the new cases in Italy just on its own, and it's about 5,400 per day on the 1st of April. That's what I'm getting. That's where the peak comes. So they're already in the 4,000s here in the last week or so of March. And they're going to go up to 5,000, they're going to come back to 4,000. That takes you into the second half of April. So whatever you see in Italy now, and this is new cases, remember, those people will be sick for some time. Italy hasn't had, unfortunately, all the grief that it's going to have. Okay, on that note, I shall say ta-ta, bye-bye.